again we hear them calling for war. It doesn't matter what they're fighting for. They light the match and watch the whole world burst into flame. The story's always the same. So tell me people, are you ready to kill? Behold the propaganda, get your fill. A distant enemy is threatening our freedom again. How much would you like to spend? Millions are falling in line. It's just a matter of time. Endless destruction will ensure their pockets are lined for all time. No more defending the lines behind the never-ending war. It's time to make them realize we will no longer be their whore. No more, no more. No more, no more. No more, no more.
Okay, so time for another video today. So apparently, U.S. conducted more airstrikes into Iraq, resulting in the death of the Iranian General Soleimani, I think is how you say his name. And of course, as you saw a little bit from my intro that I used, the song I used, I'm not a fan of trying to use like an actual song. Typically, I try to, find some sort of a cover of it, some sort of instrumental thing. If I use something, but I don't want to use someone's actual song, copyright and all that. But in this case, I thought that the lyrics, were way too. Even though I still kind of did what I'm describing with the Buffalo Springfield a while back, for what it's worth. I didn't actually put lyrics in that one either. But the difference is, here, these lyrics, and I didn't use the entire song, but they fit way too perfectly for what's going on. And I think it's very clear that this was exactly what they were talking about when Disturbed, made this song. The song was called No More by Disturbed, by the way. Okay, and I will be, posting a link to that in the description below. So, this is just more of the endless war that we've been getting into time after time after time. Year after year after year. Conflict after conflict after conflict. Stuff Tulsi Gabbard's been talking about. We can't get out of this conflict. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And people like John Bolton, you saw that tweet right there at the beginning, praising exactly what was going on. Like, yeah, I hope this is just the first steps toward regime change. Wow. So yeah, with that being said, I want to just get straight on into these clips. We're going to stop after each one. We'll talk a little bit and then move on to the next clip. But there's 3 clips here that I want to go through. The first one being RT America. Ron Paul went on recently and had a little bit of discussion about what's going on. So let's just take a look at that one first.
Joining us now, the president of the Ron Paul Institute and the Liberty Institute, none other than Ron Paul himself. The congressman is good enough to join us on this day on a subject that's certainly near and dear to his heart. Congressman, your son, Rand Paul, today has been screaming as loud as he possibly can about this being an unconstitutional act on the part of the White House. What say you?
What's new? A lot of that's been going on for a long time. I would say that our foreign policy's been based on unconstitutionality, especially since World War II. How about 1953 when we sent our CIA in to start all this mess in Iran? So no, it's unmitigated. It's horrible. They don't care, and it's very bipartisan, and it's very much motivated by money and the military-industrial complex. So it's a mess. But this is a conclusion that should surprise surprise no one. I'm working on the assumption that our country is totally financially bankrupt, morally bankrupt, and that our empire is shrinking. And I think this is another sign that we're losing credibility. And I think the best thing that could happen in the immediate future is for Iraq to take a stronger stand and say, get out, we're tired of you. You've saved us from Saddam Hussein, but we don't need more, saving us. So I think they need to pass up and say, get out, and get the public pressure on in the world pressure to say, well, they have a right to it, because certainly our agreement to be there didn't authorize us to take the law into our own hand and start shooting and killing and shooting, diplomats that are just coming into the country that had a right to, and they didn't cause a threat. This whole idea that we, the United States, had to do this to save American lives, I feel less safe when we do these kind of things.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Americans have died since
Dr. Paul, I just got to ask you, do you think this is an act of war, as some have been asserting, while others say, well, the guy wasn't in Iran, what was he doing in Iraq in the first place?
Well, I guess you have to worry about semantics about war. Yeah, it's a war. You can have a cyber war. You can have all kinds of wars. But we've been warring with Iran for a long, long time. But is it World War II with the tanks rolling in? No, I don't think so. But there's going to be a lot of people suffering. I've been arguing that sanctions are an act of war. And has Iran suffered from sanctions? Yes. But it built up a backbone for them. It didn't undermine their government. So sanctions are an act of war, and we participated in it all the time. And I think that's where it starts. It's interventionism is immoral and unconstitutional, and it is a war of sorts. But I don't see it as a war like World War II.
Dr. Ron Paul, as usual, thanks, sir, for taking time to share your perspective on this with us today.
So, yeah, let's break that one down for just a moment there. So Ron Paul, as usual, comes on, calls out the military-industrial complex very, very well, does an excellent job of explaining how, in a way, when you consider as far as what could be considered an actual act of war, sanctions could be considered an act of war. Even though it's not a physical attack, well, what's cyber war? Cyber war doesn't have to be a physical attack either, okay? It's a way of one country trying to do damage to another country for whatever the reason, okay? Whatever the reason there is. And we've got to remember one thing here, okay? Number one, the Middle East has had conflict all throughout of it. For how long? First of all, we'll go before Jesse Ventura's, because Jesse Ventura's got a great way of explaining this that I'm going to say in just a second. Let's go way beyond Jesse Ventura's example. For anyone who, whether or not you're a Christian, if you have any form of, knowledge of, the Bible, the Quran, whatever, okay, if you've got some sort of, biblical knowledge, you'll know that there was conflict back during those times, okay? First, and history shows there was conflict all the way back then into the Middle East, okay? I mean, what is it? The story of Moses. What happened? The Egyptians enslaved another group of people. Is Egypt part of the Middle East? Okay? They enslaved the Israelites. So this is nothing new. This whole area, it's been conflict since the dawn of time. But if you really have some sort of biblical knowledge, then you would also know, and this is the eerie part. This is the eerie part, okay? You ever listen to the story of Abraham, okay? Now, Muslims trace their heritage back to Abraham. So do the Jews. Okay? And if you read the story of Abraham in the Bible, it says that Abraham, or apparently God came to Abraham and said that you will be the father of many nations. Okay? That's the story of Abraham in the Bible, right? That he said, you're going to be the father of many nations. And his wife was such an old woman at the time. God, and so they're like, well, how is this possible? She's too old to bear children. And so God said, well, no, the kids will be with her, right? And she laughed at the idea because she's like, I'm too old for this. I can't have kids. And supposedly when she laughed at the idea, that then angered God. He said, well, I'm going to punish you and not let you have them right now. So Abraham, in his way of trying to cope with all this, then this is the biblical story, okay, then went and had children with one of his maids, okay? He had a son by this maid named Ishmael, okay? But that didn't exactly appease God either. God basically said, I didn't say you were going to have kids with that woman. I said you were going to have kids with your wife, okay? So as a result, since he felt that actually displeased God, he supposedly then banished this maid and that son of his out. Kicked them out and banished them, okay? And then at some point later on, God did allow Abraham and his wife to have a son. And that son's name was Isaac, okay? Now, the story continues on, but here's where I'm going to end it, okay? God then told Abraham that because of the fact that he did not obey what he told him, that his sons would fight until the end of time. Now, I know some people are going to listen to that and say, "Oh, well, that's the Bible. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in the Bible. That's a bunch of fairy tales. You can't go based off that." Have your opinion. I still find it very eerie that it said that, and they've been fighting like cats and dogs for hundreds of years, because the Muslims trace their heritage to Abraham through Ishmael, and the Jews trace their heritage to Abraham through Isaac. And I find that to be very ironic, because they cannot get along at all. I mean, at all. They literally just fight like cats and dogs with each other all the time. So, now that you've gone through the Sunday school lesson here, what is Jesse Ventura's go-to explanation for the Middle East? Now, this gets into fact, not religious doctrine, okay? So if you don't read into my first, example that I'm giving there because it comes from a religious book and you choose to not believe that, okay, but this doesn't come from a religious book. This comes from history books. And that is that when Christopher Columbus, now, before anyone gets into, how bad Columbus was, we're not here to praise Columbus, okay? That's not the point of this. Simply put, when he set out to try and discover the new world, as they call it, or whatever, what he was actually trying to do, the reason that he called the indigenous people that he found when he arrived here Indians, was because he was trying to find another route to get to India. Okay? Now, back in Columbus's day, the world believed that the earth was flat, and that if you go too far, you will fall off the face of the earth into an abyss and monsters and all this crap, right? That you would fall off the face of the earth. The earth was flat, and if you go too far, you're going to fall off the face of it. Okay? Now, other people are going to say that he believed that wasn't true, that the earth was round, and he had studied things, from people who'd said otherwise. But, okay, yeah, but maybe so. The overall consensus, though, was that it was flat. And so he really didn't have much proof to prove everyone wrong. Okay? But what he was trying to do, like I said, find that other route to India. Why? Why would you need to find another route to India? Why would you go out? And if anyone tells you that the whole reason was to prove the earth wasn't flat, No, believe it or not, I actually did have a teacher tell me that in school, and I researched it. That's complete bullshit. Complete bullshit. The reason that he wanted to find an alternate route to get to India is because in order to get to India, they would have to travel by land through the Middle East. They didn't really have a good, waterway that they felt was good. So the big takeaway there is that even at that point in history, the Middle East was still in such conflict and so much turmoil that Columbus was willing to take a chance that he could be wrong and lead a crew to possibly fall off the face of the earth to try and find another trade route to India rather than go through the Middle East. Because if he succeeded, he would have felt he would be a hero for finding some way to avoid going through that chaos to get to the Middle East. But of course, if he failed, well, I'm dying, whatever, but it's, it's not exactly safe going through there either. So that's how much chaos the Middle East was all the way back then. But when we look at Iran particularly, it was, as Ron Paul said, it was our CIA back in the 1950s that went over and destabilized everything. Our CIA was going all around the world interfering and stuff, right? And overthrowing governments. So remember, back in those days when this particularly happened, Iran had an elected leader. Not just a dictator, but an elected leader. And we didn't like the guy, so our CIA goes in and outs him and puts someone in charge who would be a dictator but would be more favorable to us. The people didn't like him. There was an uprising. So we've had our hands in the cookie jar of trouble in that country in particular for a long time. Now, just because the people who are alive right now may not have been part of it, if a country did something like that to us, we would be holding anger against those countries. For example, look what happened on 9/11, and look what people's response was to a lot of Arabic people, people of Arab descent after that, and the prejudice that was shown against them. So if a country has been messing with you for a long time, going all the way back to the 1950s when they're trying to actually undermine your democratic elected leaders, that does send quite a bad message, doesn't it? But that being said, now let's hear what one of the hawks of the world, a man named General Jack Keane, frequent visitor to the Fox News channel, well involved with the military-industrial complex, I would say, and he's a frequent Fox News contributor, okay? At a previous job that I'd worked at, they had Fox News on a lot. I saw this guy on the program quite often, okay? He was on there like clockwork. Let's see what he has to say about all this.
General Jack Keane is also with us this evening, chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, good to see you this evening. Thank you for being here. I want to start with this. This is a soundbite from the former CIA director, Mike Morrell. Here's what he said about what we can all expect now. Watch.
The problem is that comes at a very high cost. Number one, there will be dead Americans, dead civilian Americans as a result of this, possibly over the next few days. In any place where Iran has its proxies, Iraq is the most likely place, but also Lebanon, Bahrain, other places in the Middle East.
General, do you agree with that?
Well, I think the Iranians are going to retaliate, that's for sure. They as much stated it. What's going on with the Iranians, so our viewers can understand, this civil unrest driven by the sanctions has really got the Iranians back on their heels. It spiked in November. And there is nothing more threatening to their regime than their own people. Yeah. And that's what has got their concern. And they're determined to create as much crisis as they can for the international community to put pressure on President Trump to back off the sanctions. And that is why, as you mentioned in the introduction with a former previous guest, why they have been escalating military actions to create that crisis to pressure the president. But the problem is they crossed a red line with this president when he exercised enormous constraint in not taking that provocation, but said, don't kill any Americans. And when they did, he acted very strongly, as we've seen.
Yeah. You know, the suggestion that there's no strategy is one that you hear a lot. We started hearing it last night and all through today. But it strikes me that it was obvious that in the prior administration, the strategy was to negotiate, to deal, and to try to create an environment that de-escalated through that avenue. But clearly, this president has a different way of going about it. And as I said at the top, he is the first one to take out Soleimani, which is something that was probably opportunities that these other presidents, President Obama, President Bush, had, I would imagine.
Yeah, there is a definite strategy here. This Trump administration looked at the appeasement strategy, as I would define it, that President Obama exercised for 8 years as his seminal foreign policy objective. It was his Nixon moment, going to China, so to speak, is what he was trying to achieve. And he thought, by appeasing the Iranians, the nuclear deal was the centerpiece of it, that they would act responsibly and join the community of responsible nations. And what did we get? We got $130 billion put in their hands, fueling the civil wars in Syria and Yemen, hundreds of thousands of rockets in Lebanon. The Middle East was put on fire. And as a result of it, this administration came in and fundamentally rejected that strategy, and with our allies, definitely has a strategy. And it's to confront the Iranians using diplomatic and economic means to bring them back to the negotiating table, not just to stop nuclear weapons and missiles, but to curb their behavior in the region. That is a sound strategy. And that's what this administration is about. And to say they don't have one is nonsense.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but we know that we have our military is on alert in Italy for the possibility of potentially going in to protect our assets and embassies in Lebanon. And as you say, retaliation is likely, and we'll be watching.
They're going to go in there in the event there has to be an evacuation.
Okay.
And pressure is put. 173rd would go to Lebanon to evacuate the embassy, and the 82nd would go to Baghdad to evacuate the embassy. That's primarily what they're there for.
All right, General Keane, we'll be talking to you. And then,
Okay, let's break down what Mr. Hawk here had to say, General Jack Keane. Pretty much, he went through the typical Republican military-industrial complex, even mostly Fox News talking points about why this president did such a great thing, why this should be done. In other words, he's reading out of the typical handbook people like him, John Bolton, everybody else get all their facts and details from. Okay? Oh, we gave all that money back to the Iranians. Oh, and what a fool that made Obama look like. Why would you give them all that money? So first of all, it's been matter of clear record. That money was their money. We had it. We just gave it back to them. Okay? If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go look it up. You can read all about it. Okay? But that's a matter of fact. Okay? That's first and foremost. Second of all, he brings up, well, and what did they do with the money when they got back? Well, they start, funding civil unrest and everything. He said like Lebanon, but then he brought up civil war in Yemen. Civil war in Yemen. You mean that? You mean they're trying to help fund the people in Yemen who are currently having a genocide conducted against them by Saudi Arabia? So we're saying that Iran is the number one state sponsor of terror, yet our mother frickin' ally, good old Saudi Arabia over here, is conducting a genocide in Yemen. And Bernie Sanders was one of the leading forces on getting a bipartisan measure through Congress and the Senate to stop hating the Saudis in their genocide in Yemen. And it was vetoed by Mr. Restraint, President Trump. because he's very in bed with the Saudis. I don't like saying that. I absolutely hate having to say that, but the man is. But he's among good company. Keep in mind here, people. Let's go back to those UAE indictments. Even though the UAE is not part of Saudi Arabia, they're neighbors and they're two very wealthy countries, and they have both been very frequent givers. We just don't have as much information about just how much the Saudis have actually invested. We do have those UAE indictments. We do know how much UAE pumped money into our political affairs. Okay? We do know that possibly came from the Crown Prince of the UAE. But what we also know is that Saudi Arabia gave plenty of money to Hillary Clinton. We do know that since Donald Trump has become president, there's been more business ties done by the Trump business associated with Saudi Arabia. Starts to get a little fishy, doesn't it? Doesn't it? And yet, we want to kiss Saudi Arabia's ass. Saudi Arabia, who will hack a journalist to pieces, okay? And let's be clear, as far as funding is concerned, they sponsor way more of the Wahhabists than Iran has. By far, Saudi Arabia sponsors the Wahhabi terrorists out there that are wreaking havoc, and have for quite some time. And how do we treat them? Oh, we sell them a boatload of freaking arms. No, they need more guns. So they can do what with them? Protect their oil field? Hell no! To sell them to a freaking Wahhabi. Because as far as their oil fields are concerned, we don't need these guns to protect our oil fields. Somebody attacks us, we'll go call on our bitches in the United States who we've bought off, which are all these elected politicians. We're going to go call on you and say, come here, bitch. Guard our oil field because we own your ass and we've bought your ass and we want you to do this for us. Oh, and while you're at it, sell us some more guns. Chop, chop, bitch. That's exactly what their whole attitude is towards this entire system. And yet we treat Saudi Arabia one way, and yet we keep going after Iran. Now, am I trying to defend Iran, that Iran is some great country with this great leader? No, but we need to understand something. They harbor a lot of ill will towards this country because of how we screwed up their country over 50 years ago. And we still keep slapping sanctions. And then, of course, you hear that the whole Iran deal, first they point out the money. Then they point out that technically under the Iran deal, they still could have, after so long, it didn't actually stop them from being able to get nuclear weapons. It basically just, kicked the can down the road, basically. Here's the deal. In the fine print of the Iran nuclear deal, okay, it said that they could not enrich uranium past a certain point, right? And turns out they weren't actually doing that. We had no proof that they were, okay? And then they finally went beyond that limit after a lot of tensions broke out earlier last year, okay? But they still were not enriching it at a level necessary to be making nuclear weapons. Imagine that. Okay, so they weren't actually pushing down the road to try and make a nuclear weapon. We don't have the evidence. All we have is mainstream media propaganda talking points, but if you look into the fine details and the fine print there, you'll find you don't actually have any substance to back that claim up other than just what you hear people on Fox and whoever else say about the issue. Okay? But there was no real evidence released. Then, of course, we had the drone that got shot down. And there's the big controversy over that. Now, the United States says we weren't in their airspace. They say that we were in their airspace. They have proof we were in their airspace. So shoot it down. What was John Bolton's response? Oh, fire crap at them. Shoot them. And luckily, Trump didn't take his response. Trump did not take his response on the matter. Okay, he didn't want to go with it. Okay? Thank goodness for that. But now here we are later, okay, and the big pushback now is they're going to say, well, Well, I'm hearing a lot of people, well, why was Soleimani in Iraq? He's the Iranian general. Why was he in Iraq? Maybe Donald Trump's onto something here. Maybe he was in it. Maybe they were trying to plan an attack on us. All right, and then they brought up like dead Americans. Okay. Show me the proof on how many Americans died. Okay? And show me what evidence you have that they were getting ready to plan an attack. See, they're going to come out and tell you these things, but they're not releasing the evidence. That's like going into a court trial and saying, they did it, and we know they did it. And then the judge and the jury goes, all right, well, show us your evidence. Well, we can't do that. Why not? It's classified. We just tell you they did it, so you're supposed to believe me because we're the investigators. And so if we found it, and we just come here to tell you we found it, and you're supposed to believe us because it's our job to find it. That doesn't apply in court. That doesn't apply in the criminal justice system. But yet our government just wants to come out and say, this is the fact, and you need to believe us. Where's the evidence? Well, that's for me to know and you not to. You don't need to know that. You don't have security clearances and a bunch of COG 622 paperwork filled out, and you know you don't work at the Pentagon and you're not an elected official, so you can't know that. Don't I pay your salary? Don't I pay taxes that pay you? What? I don't know what you're talking about, man. No. My salary? Sure, yeah, you pay a little bit of that. I appreciate that, but you know who else pays my salary? The people who buy me to get elected beyond you. Because if I only made what you paid me, I really wouldn't, be as rich as I am, because technically I would have had to have worked probably over 50 years and saved every dime to have the money that I have from being in office X amount of time. So the math doesn't really add up there. So see, yeah, you don't actually pay my wealth, my wealthy business interests and financial backers. They pay for me. You give me a little bit of chump change. Okay? So that's Mr. Hawk's take on everything there, Mr. General Jack Keane. Okay? Now here comes the big surprise. And this is one I think that has been surprising Jimmy Dore more over the last year too. Say what you want about this guy. Say what you want to about him. But when it comes to the foreign policy, man, it's surprising they're letting him say this kind of stuff on Fox News to one extent. But on the other hand, man, he is so dead on. So dead on his take on all this. I got to play this clip from Tucker Carlson and what his response is to what's going on in Iran. Let's take a look.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Yesterday, as you know, an American airstrike killed an Iranian general called Qasem Soleimani. For the past 21 years, Soleimani commanded the Quds Force, which is responsible for paramilitary operations outside the national borders of Iran. In that role, Soleimani was believed to be a patron of the Shia militias that regularly attacked American troops during the Iraq War. He was also a major player in Syria during their civil war, as well as in the campaign against ISIS. Though he was little known to the American public, Soleimani was among the most famous living figures in Iran and also among the most powerful, according to some accounts, second only to the supreme leader of that country. The Iranian government has already vowed to extract what it has called forceful revenge against the U.S. in response to his death. Now, whether that will happen and what form it might take remains to be seen. But it's no exaggeration to say that by the next time this show airs, we could be engaged in a conflict, a real conflict, with Iran. From Iran's perspective, we're already there. If Iranian forces killed the chairman of our Joint Chiefs of Staff, for example, would you consider it an act of war? You would. So what happened yesterday wasn't just another symbolic bombing sortie of the kind we've seen in Syria. It was a pivot point. Neocons in Washington understood that immediately. Congratulations to all involved in eliminating Qasem Soleimani, tweeted disgraced former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Hope this is the first step to regime change in Tehran, end quote. That, of course, has been the neocon objective all along. The president, though, has for years opposed that objective and in a statement said that regime change and war are not the point at all.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war. We do not seek regime change. However, the Iranian regime's aggression in the region, including the use of proxy fighters to destabilize its neighbors, must end, and it must end now. If Americans anywhere are threatened, we have all of those targets already fully identified, and I am ready and prepared to take whatever action is necessary.
According to the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, meanwhile, Soleimani was killed to forestall planned attacks on Americans. But as he later conceded, those attacks would have occurred in the Middle East, not here in America.
President Trump's decision to remove Qasem Soleimani from the battlefield saved American lives. There's no doubt about that. He was actively plotting in the region to take actions, a big action as he described it, that would have put dozens, if not hundreds, of American lives at risk. And last night was the time that we needed to strike to make sure that this imminent attack that he was working actively was disrupted.
Was there any imminent threat to the U.S. homeland?
These were threats that were located in the region.
Threats in the region. If you don't live in Washington, here's the translation. That would be in hostile Middle Eastern countries, places where American troops would never be in the first place were it not for the insistent demands of non-geniuses like Max Boot and John Bolton. But never mind. No one in Washington is in mood for big picture questions right now, questions the obvious ones like, is Iran really the greatest threat we face, and who's actually benefiting from this? And why are we continuing to ignore the decline of our own country in favor of jumping into another quagmire from which there is no obvious exit? By the way, if we're still in Afghanistan 19 years later, what makes us think there's a quick way out of Iran? And so on. Nobody is thinking like that right now. Instead, chest beaters like Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska are making the usual warlike noises, the ones they always make.
So I got to interject in the middle of this clip and point out one thing there first and foremost, okay? So the whole thing about saving the American lives and all that, and as Tucker Carlson pointed out, that didn't mean attacks here. That meant attacks in the Middle East that could have resulted in the deaths of Americans. Well, what has the Iranian regime come out and said since this happened? There will be American deaths. So they've come out and unequivocally said, yeah, we're retaliating on your asses for that. So you did this to avoid a war and to save American lives, yet the result of what you're doing is drawing the exact opposite response from the Iranians. Wow, does that make a whole hell of a lot of sense. Now, on top of that, this whole argument that you got Mike Pompeo giving right there, okay, which is, well, it did to save the American lives in the region because they were going to carry out an attack that could have killed Americans. Well, wait one damn minute here. Hold on a second. Okay. Now let's look at U.S. foreign policy again, for example. U.S. has, right now, what are we involved in? Like 7 conflicts, something along those lines? And how many civilians have been killed as a result of careless drone strikes? See, we've talked about that before. Many other people have talked about that on their channels. So you've got a lot of civilian casualties in drone strikes. Now, what would you say that the likelihood is that at some point in history, whether it be in the Vietnam War, whether it be in, the Gulf War, whether it be in Iraq, Afghanistan, or any of these other places we've stuck our noses into, that at some point a result of one of our attacks may have caused the death of someone of a foreign country that had nothing to do with the country we were trying to attack? Let's give a hypothetical here because I don't actually have any proof that this particularly happened, but I would say that it's likely that something like this could happen. What's to say that a Russian doesn't get killed one day in the middle of some strike accidentally? Does that then give the Russians the right to launch attacks on United States forces? Not only launch attacks on our forces, but then kill, I don't know, the Secretary of Defense, or like Tucker pointed out, the Joint Chief of Staff, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Okay? Does that then give them the right to retaliate that way? Because we could debate whether or not it gave them the right to, but we know damn well what the reaction to that would be if they were to do something like that. Much less if they only did it because they thought we were going to attack something that could harm their interests or cause someone from their country to die. Because, see, the accusation isn't that they actually attacked and caused the death. It is that they were going to attack, resulting in death. So we're going to kill your top military guy. That if another country had done that to us, then the government and the military industrial complex, they'd be flipping their utter shit at what went on. But yet we go do it and we did it in the name of America. Everything's okay here. Oh, bullshit it is. Bullshit it is. You're pushing us closer and closer and closer down a road to war here. Pure and simple. You're pushing us further down this road that leads to one thing, and that's more war. And we're going to talk more about that potential war, but let's just finish getting through this clip first.
This is very simple, Ben Sasse wrote in a statement last night. General Soleimani is dead because he was an evil bastard who murdered Americans, which is essentially true. Soleimani was certainly a bad guy. But does that make killing him, quote, very simple? It does not. Nothing about life, and certainly nothing about killing, is ever very simple, and any politician who tells you otherwise is dumb or is lying. Yes, Soleimani was linked to the deaths of Americans. Nobody mourns his passing. But Mexico and China are also linked to the deaths of Americans. Each has flooded our country with narcotics, from which tens of thousands of Americans die every single year. Not that anyone in power cares. So does that mean we get to bomb Oaxaca? Can we start assassinating generals in the People's Liberation Army? Maybe. Maybe Ben Sasse will call for that, too. He's a former consultant and a very tough character. But before we enter into a single new war, there's a criterion that ought to be met. Our leaders should explain to us how that conflict will make the United States richer and more secure. There are an awful lot of bad people in this world. We can't kill them all. It's not our job. Instead, our government exists to defend and promote the interests of American citizens, period. That's why we have a government. So has the killing of Soleimani done that? Maybe. No one in Washington has explained how. Instead, like Ben Sasse, they're telling us what an awful person he was. He clearly was. So, that's irrelevant. Meanwhile, it's pretty clear that things could start to move in the wrong direction pretty quickly. We're praying they don't, but they could. How do we know that? Because we've seen it before. We fought quite a number of wars around the Middle East in recent decades. We attacked Saddam Hussein twice, as you know. In the end, we killed him. We invaded and occupied Afghanistan. We toppled Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. We fought ISIS in Syria and then for some reason stuck around. We're still there. We joined humanitarian missions in Lebanon and Somalia. Our special forces have been quietly fighting in Yemen, Pakistan, Niger, who knows where else, many other places. In every single place, each of these conflicts has turned out to be longer and bloodier and more expensive than we were promised in the first place. The benefits? Often they've been non-existent. A lot of lectures about how the people we're killing deserve to die. Certainly they did. Hope that makes you feel better. What do the American people think about all of this? Not that anyone cares. Well, it's too soon, strictly speaking, to know the killing of Soleimani happened just last night. But just 5 months ago, after months of supposed Iranian provocation, Americans didn't seem to view Iran as a major concern, not even close. In a Gallup poll taken last August, just 18% of Americans said that they backed military force to shut down Iran's nuclear program. 78% said they preferred diplomacy and economic sanctions alone. So in a democracy, you'd think this would matter. But as is so often the case, the preferences of actual Americans don't enter the equation at all. They're immaterial. In 2016, Donald Trump ran on a promise of fewer foreign adventures, considering the ones we'd embarked upon didn't work very well. He vowed instead to focus on our problems here at home, which are growing. Against the odds, he won that election, probably because of that promise. But ever since, Washington, including some around the president, have been committed to ignoring the results of that election and its implications. Washington has wanted war with Iran for decades. They've been working toward it. They may have finally gotten it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's remember that the guy who's the Secretary of Defense right now has ties to Raytheon. Okay? The military-industrial complex have got their hooks deep into the Trump administration after all. So all that promise about the anti-war stuff, nope. Trump has completely shit the bed on that aspect of his presidency, without a doubt. Now, let's examine the fecal matter here for a moment. It's still fecal matter, but it could be a lot worse. He could have had a complete nasty case of diarrhea on this issue and just took us into a ton of more wars. He didn't do that, but it looks like he's now taking action that could actually end up getting us into a conflict. So we've been tiptoeing, kind of tap dancing around this idea of an Iran conflict. It looks like if it's going to happen, yeah, we're on the brink of it for sure right now. Okay? So if it happens, then even that aspect, yeah, he's going to finish dumping all over the rest of it, and it's non-salvageable. Now, some have said he's going to warp that some way into helping him. I don't know how. You heard what Tucker Carlson just said there at the end. The polls didn't support the Iranian intervention, okay? And if they just come out to the American people and say, well, they were going to attack us, and don't release good evidence that will convince the people, and so far when they say things, they've been saying things, and they haven't released that evidence with Iran so far, that they release some sort of evidence, but that's heavily disputed pretty much every time that they have. Okay, or it's been proven that they're warping the facts around. Well, you got a problem there. You've got a serious problem there, because if the people don't buy it, how in the hell is that going to help Donald Trump? If anything, that's going to make a lot of people who didn't want the war and Trump ran against all this interventionism, it's going to then turn them away from Donald Trump. Now, do I think that most of the Democrats are going to be any better? Do I think Joe Biden would be any better on this? Do I think maybe even Elizabeth Warren may be a little bit better on this? No. I do not. I think they're too bought and paid for. And for that matter, if they really thought that what Trump was doing was that wrong or that immoral, why'd they just give him a bigger military budget? Does that not sit very awkwardly with people? Really? Something about that just doesn't sit very well with me. Wonder why that is. Now why are they doing things like that? Why are they pushing, that entire agenda to give him more money? Because they would be doing the same thing if they were in office. Because they're bought by the same people. This takes us back to one big important factor here, okay? And that is the fact, and I think that this is a point that Israel was making over on Big Talk, Little Talk when he covered this issue, okay? This keeps happening because the American economy right now revolves around war. It revolves around frickin' war. The very thing Eisenhower warned us about, okay? It's what our economy is so based off of. We have basically destroyed our manufacturing in this country. Sure, some of it's come back, but our manufacturing still is in too much of a state of disarray and uncertainty compared to where we are, or what we were rather, during the golden years. Okay? The post-World War II era. Now, you could say the rest of the world was in a state of rebuild, true. Okay, we didn't really have many competitors in any other country that was a bigger country may have been rocked by the results of World War II. Okay, fair enough. But even well on into the 60s and the 70s, we still had decent jobs and stuff in this country. It's when the union busting started taking place, and it's when these lopsided trade deals started being negotiated, when we started losing massive trade deficits, and then free trade deals come into the equation, making it so that our manufacturing is trying to compete on a level playing field with manufacturing being done in countries where the conditions are far worse than ours. And you can't compete on the same level when one is being able to force their workers to work long hours for poor wages and no benefits and basically have sweatshop conditions, while ours are working at a nice pace that doesn't completely break the back of the American worker to no end, okay? Good money, decent benefits, the old typical decent middle class living. People were able to go out and make and provide a income for their families off of. And they tried to stack that against like what's going on in Mexico or China. And the standards are so completely different. Okay? And I can say that, and I actually have a good example of that. At a place I used to work, the security at that facility worked 8-hour shifts. You had a first, a second, and a third shift, and you worked 40 hours a week. But that company had a facility in Mexico that used a security company as well. Not the same security company. Okay? But those guards at the plant in Mexico worked 24-hour shifts at a time. 24-hour shifts at a time. It is a completely different working environment when you start trying to look at us compared to these countries. And so you can't put us on a level playing field. And so as soon as they did, those products become so much cheaper because of the cheap labor, the long hours, and the fact they can turn out more product as a result of it all because they're just working you into the ground. And our products can't be turned out as fast, and there's also the aspect of having to put more time and effort and pay for the benefits and whatnot, so it becomes more costly when it's made here, okay? And so as a result, those jobs wanted the money and realized the opportunity that they had and outsourced. So therefore, we weren't having things made in the country anymore. That's the big problem where the Keynesian economic theory of buying American goods so that it reinvests into those American jobs. The problem is a lot of those goods you go to the store and you buy, a lot of it isn't being made in America anymore. So you're not reinvesting into those American jobs. You're reinvesting in jobs that went to Mexico. You're reinvesting in jobs that went to Japan, China, wherever else they could go to save a buck, and they went. And you're reinvesting into that, not into it here. And so the one big thing, the one big manufacturing that has stayed around and has affected so many different forms of manufacturing are the people who can get military DOD contracts to make crap for the military. Now, if they get into bed with making this stuff for the military, there has to be something done with it. They can't just make more and more and more and more tanks and fighter jets and everything else, and it just sit around. That does no good. That does no good. Imagine GM turning out a bunch of cars that never get sold on the market. That doesn't sound like a good business strategy now, does it? So therefore, the more of these uniforms they make, they need more people to enlist to wear them. The more tanks, the more jets, or not necessarily tanks, but Humvees or fighter jets or whatever equipment that they're making, they have to be able to use it. Now, the government ain't just going to keep buying this stuff to stockpile, even though they have a massive stockpile. But these companies are going to make it, and then they're going to sell it to the government. Well, eventually the government's going to have to start using some of it. But if we're not in a conflict, then how do we use it? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense now, does it? Well, now you get the answer. Either we have to turn around and sell it to other countries, and we do in some cases, to allies and whatnot like that. But the alternative is we actually use it, and that's why we stay in conflicts and actually keep growing the number of conflicts so that we stay in more and more and more conflicts and use this crap up. And of course, it's these people who have, financial interest with the DOD, the representatives, their lobbyists, they go to the federal government and lobby them to keep this thing going. Keep it all going. So our economy has become completely based off of war and interventionism. It's what keeps our gears turning at this point. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And here's the other problem. The more we keep pursuing actions like this, all the work that has been done trying to convince Kim Jong-un in North Korea to de-nuke and bring about some peace there, consider his recent saber rattling, and now look at what just happened here. Yeah, that's all, unless I am thoroughly surprised, probably about to go completely down the toilet, or as we say in the South, that whole deal's about to go to hell in a handbasket. Pure and simple. So it has been a complete and utter waste of time and a complete waste of space, and we are now getting closer and closer and closer to the brink of war, and the more actions that the Trump administration takes to do these sorts of things, the more it's going to, one, take any of the work he's tried to do with Kim Jong-un and toss it right on out the window, push us closer into war, and we've already got enough conflict going on in this country, or around the world, not just in this country. You know what I mean? But this is just absolute bull crap. I'll be honest, that's absolute bull crap. And we can't get our noses out of it. And for a guy who ran on not being Mr. Interventionism when he got elected, the first red flag that I had was, okay, if you don't want to be that guy, why are you appointing so many hawks into your cabinet? Why are you putting so many of these crooked ass people into your cabinet? This makes no sense to me. Why did you appoint John Bolton? Why did you appoint Mike Pompeo? Why did you put someone like Haspel into a position? And this is a woman who was involved with the whole torture scandal. Why did you appoint all these hawkish people? Honestly, this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And we are on that verge of war now. It wouldn't surprise me if it doesn't happen. And this is exactly why I want to see Tulsi Gabbard get that nomination. To be able to be that one to run against President Trump. Because at worst, even if she lost to President Trump, she's going to heavily expose his hypocrisy on his anti-war stance big time. Because what he's done and what he said are two entirely different things, and she'll be that one that'll actually expose it. Don't expect Joe Biden or any of those cats to go out there and do it. Because the only thing they're going to attack Trump on is actually from the right and say he wasn't hawkish enough, basically. And that does absolutely no good for anyone. And so, again, I think this is just very representative of the bigger overall problem that we've got in the country today. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't end up in conflict potentially very, very soon.